Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. We are here with the one and only David C. George. You know him, I know him, we love him. There's no absolutes over here. We've talked about frameworks for life and frameworks for language. And what you may not know is David C. George has a recipe, I think, for incredible success. Not only his books, but he's fun to talk to. And we've got some new ideas we want to discuss today, especially something that he's kind of been working on a little bit. And I'm hopeful he's going to kind of share it with us today. But before we share exactly what it is, I thought we'd take you down the pathway of how he got to this idea. And along the way, we can share some stories. So David C. George, Mr. Wizard, I don't know if there's anybody here who doesn't know you, but just for the one or two random people that may show up, can you just introduce yourself and then we'll take it from there.
All right. I'm Benjamin C. George, or David C. George today. Not sure how your notes printed that one out.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But you can find me on benjamincgeorge.com. I'm author of No Absolutes, Framework for Life. I do a whole bunch of other little things here and there. Getting the podcast started up and enjoying talking to George week in and week out about the world, how things work, and where we're going.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we got started, we were just talking about building things and projects and working together, and we came upon this idea. Both Benjamin and I have done some things before, and for me, I had started a production company when I was in my early 20s, and there was a lot of things involved. There were dancing girls, and there was music, and there were drugs, and none of those things really, while a great time, it's kind of a recipe for disaster. And me and my buddy, we had a great time. We made some pretty good money, but we pretty much blew all the money. And at the end of the day, that recipe led to us kind of cracking our friendship and cracking our way into entrepreneurship and understanding that, partnerships are pretty good for marriage, but they're pretty difficult in business. And a lot of times it can lead to the understanding of no loyalty. And that's kind of how we had got started about talking about business and building things. And maybe you can share, like, how have you found the partnership relationship to work in previous adventures with yourself?
I've had it never end up well, but I've had it start out great a number of times. There's a lot to be said about having somebody else who shares your energy and your enthusiasm for a project.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can get things going, but the second that dollar signs start to roll into bank accounts, all of a sudden, hey, where did that laptop come from? Hey, I didn't know we were, flying to Florida this weekend. A lot of random things start to occur, and a lot of it can be, a lot of it can be done in the front end if you have good communication and you establish boundaries and guidelines and rules for the whole project and endeavor. But oftentimes it's like what you did. Hey, let's start a production company because we have all these connections and we can make some money. Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. All right, so now we're making a whole bunch of money. Now what happens? Well, now bad choices and hurt feelings and dishonesty and all these things start to flood in because it becomes driven by the dollar sign, who gets to spend the money, who gets to have the ownership, who gets to have the power, the control, who gets to enable the vision, who gets to be labeled the CEO, who get all these little things that all of a sudden they just accumulate over time into very large rifts in relationships and partnerships in general. In my experience, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that's an experience that a lot of people have. And even partnerships that tend to work out for long periods of time, it seems to create distance between the people that create it. It's like this shared vision turns or splinters into, and one little misdecision turns into two different pathways after a long enough period of time. And it seems to go down that road. It's almost like, how there's that saying that says, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. Mm-hmm. But on the flip side of that, if you start taking money to do that thing you love, it tends to erode the passion for that thing because now it becomes a chore. And the same thing with the relationships, stuff like that. And but you found something interesting. You took a little stint down to South America and were at a hostel for a while. And what was it about the hostel that made you begin to see the world differently?
Well, I'd started. It ended up being a 6 year journey. I didn't realize it would be a 6 year journey. When I started, it was just one of those things where it's like, all right, I'm done with what's happening here right now in my life, and I packed up everything and spun the globe. Ended up in Costa Rica and was just sitting at hostels and enjoying my cultural experience. We'd have people from Japan come in. A guy was teaching us how to make sushi. We had, people from Colombia. We had people from, all over Europe doing, 6 month tours. And so what ended up happening is you got this kind of very creative vibe, a very, detached and free vibe in these hostel environments because, yeah, they're cheap, so you can afford to not, be burdened with staying there for a whole month. It'll cost you, you're out $450. And, the people who are staying there, that was affordable enough to them. Some people worked at the hostel, some people worked locally in the towns, other people were just traveling through. There's always an environment of creativity and fun, and there was always potlucks and bringing people together from all different cultures and everybody cooking one dish or meal from their culture and then having these feasts. I mean, just wonderful experiences. And it was one of those things where it's just like, wow, how can you bottle this up and bring it to the world? Because everybody who's here is just enamored with the experience, enjoying themselves profusely. And on top of that, one of the guys who worked at a hostel, he ended up moving on to start a restaurant attached to that hostel. And so, I got to see a lot of these, ideas not just blossom, but flourish too. And when you get to see things like that come to fruition from an environment like that, and without the friction that you would normally get in, society, like we're talking about the partnerships, right?
Right.
One of the many nuances, uh, you have to wonder, well, could this work on a larger scale? And how could it work? And so I've been on that journey ever since. And it was about 15 years ago now, actually.
What like it's so amazing to me. Like myself, when I came to Hawaii, I lived in California and I was working at UPS and I just kind of rolled the dice and I sold everything I had. I had a nice car that I didn't own it, but I was making payments on it. I was renting a nice place by the beach and I had a little like rowboat and like I had I was I was well. I had a lot of bills, but I was doing well. I had the
Mm,
appearance of living well, but I wasn't satisfied. And so the opportunity came up where I could take a spot in Hawaii. So I sold everything I had. I was 29 years old and
mm,
I just sold everything. And I had about 2 weeks to get here. I told my family, look, I'm moving to Hawaii. Um, I I'm gonna go out there. I'm gonna find a place to live. I'm gonna work there. I'm gonna live there. And my parents like, what are you talking about? You don't even know anybody there. You never even been there. Like, how are you gonna? When are you gonna do this? And I'm like, 2 weeks. They're like, 2 weeks. What are you talking about? And it was not only scary, but it was also very liberating. You
mhm,
don't realize how much crap you have until you try to get rid of it all. And then you go, dude, I want to get rid of this. Yeah, get rid of that, get rid of that. And so I condensed my life down to two black bags. And after I sold everything, I had like 2 grand, which
mhm.
was a pretty big eye opener for me because I had the illusion of having so much. And I had probably had like 30 pairs of shoes, like just ridiculousness. And
Right.
so I sold everything, uh, condensed my life down to 2 black bags. I got on the plane, and on the plane, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to Hawaii. I had a shot at tequila. I'm all excited. And then when I landed in Hawaii, you know, I sat in the baggage claim and everything just hit me like, oh, I don't know where my job is. I don't have a car. I don't have a place to live. I didn't do anything. I didn't
Yep.
do any research, nothing. I just got on the plane and went and just figured, yeah, I'll figure it out when I get there. And so I
That was,
sat, I'm sorry, yeah.
no, no, no. Go
Oh,
ahead.
and so I sat in the baggage claim alone with my 2 black bags, and I wasn't bawling crying, but on the inside I was just really scared. I'm like, dude, I made the worst mistake ever. I don't even know
Mhm.
what to do. I don't know what to do. And so I ended up walking outside to outside the terminal, and I caught a shuttle that goes into Waikiki. And the guy's like, "Where are you going?" And I'm like, "I need to find a cheap place to stay." And he's like, "Oh, I got you, man. I know a spot." He's like, so he takes me to like this kind of roach motel on the back of Kahio, which is like in the backside of Waikiki, and it was a room for like $60, and I stayed there for 4 days. I went on Craigslist. I found a room to rent from these
Mhm.
Korean kids. Ended up being like a poker house, which is a whole nother story. But I got a moped and figured out where work was. And a few years later, I had bought a house. I met my wife. I bought another house, sold a house, and it was so amazing what you can build yourself up to be if you strip yourself down and start from the foundation again and get rid of these ideas that were weighing you down, this idea of having to have. And it's kind of a way of forcing yourself to let go of things, and only after you do that can you begin to let the light shine through you. I know that sounds kind of cliche or silly, but I think you can really begin to build and see yourself better once you strip away all the paint and all
Attachment.
those stuff. Yeah, all the
Yeah.
attachments. And
Mhm.
when you spoke about going down to Costa Rica, it gave me that feeling again. The way you described it was like this carefreeness, and you're surrounded by this novelty and there's new cultures, and all of a sudden there's a new you emerging. Do you think that it's that, like, I was trying to narrow it down to one or two things, but I guess it's all of that that allows you to rebuild and start to see the world anew. How would you describe being able to see the world anew, like you did when you were down there?
Well, my experience, interestingly, was pretty similar to yours. It was all of a sudden, it was like I decided I'm doing this, and a couple weeks later, I was gone.
Nice.
And then all of a sudden, I rolled into the San Jose International Airport. I walked out. People are yelling Spanish at me. All the taxi drivers, right, that are trying to pick you up at the airport. I don't speak Spanish. Meanwhile, the only piece of information I have is the name of a hostel that I found online, and that was it. And so, it was similar. It was just like, oh crap, I bit off something here. I hope I can chew. It's like I hope I can swallow this one. And yeah, but it is one of those things where all of a sudden you strip away all of these attachments.
Yeah.
We're indoctrinated into this world where of consumerism, where it's oh, you have to have the PlayStation, oh, you have to have the car, oh, you have to have X, Y, and Z. Uh, and all of a sudden, when you get rid of all those things, I was down to a backpack and a laptop. I was a digital nomad before the coin was turned. Um, and so it's one of those things where all of a sudden you're like, oh, I don't need the car. I don't need all of these things. And then, you learn a lot more about people that way because at that point you're being honest. You're not hiding behind all this stuff. It's just you. You're just there. This is who I am. This is what I'm doing. I don't, there's not much else to the story right now, but guess what? This is every story has a beginning, and this is the
Yep.
beginning, right? And so, I think when we're talking about, we've talked a lot about perspective, and we've talked a
Right.
lot about, trying to reprogram the brain essentially, and, different ways to do that. But I'd say one of the most effective ways is to simply just do something like that, you know, something that seems entirely irrational at some level where you're like, oh my gosh, people talk about longevity, they talk about loyalty to companies, they talk about pensions, they talk about all these things that are kind of embroiled into this culture of the United States, that this is how we operate once you become an adult. And if you can shed those, shedding the stuff becomes really easy. And then you are a new you. You get to figure out who you really want to be in life, what you want to do, what you actually want to accomplish. Otherwise, it's just the same repetitious cycle of the party, the friends, the
Yeah.
the hangs, the concerts, the festivals, the movies, the revolving door of media, or the doom scrolling on TikTok every day, what have you.
Yeah. I think it's like the hero's journey. You know, after I
Hmm.
moved, I really started looking into philosophy much more after I had moved and come out here and started going through some tragedies. And it's so amazing to be able to identify with the stories of the past when you begin to write your own story like that. And you know, the good news for anybody is you should do one thing every day that scares you. And if you can, like I'm not saying be reckless and leave your family, and I'm not saying do that. However, I think if you're willing to take a chance and believe in yourself, then what you can accomplish is something you can't even imagine right now. And so, when I think about the hero's journey, I think about, getting the call to action. Like you feel like, oh man, I don't feel like I'm fulfilled. I feel like part of me's dying over here. And I'm just doing a bunch of blow and hanging out with strippers. And like, what, well, that has its own sort of dirty happiness to it. Like, there's so much more to life. And if you start feeling like you're dying inside, then that's a call to action. Like part of you is dying inside. And you know what? You can do
Hmm.
that stuff forever. But if you feel that call to action, you should act upon it. And once you begin to act upon it, you'll see your story beginning to unfold. And like, whenever I read mythology, whether it's Odysseus or,
Hmm.
the Green Knight or anything from Joseph Campbell, or I watch Star Wars, where you read the story about the camel to the child, you can begin to see yourself in these works of art, and it will allow you to understand that you're a work of art. And like all works of art, parts of you are chipped and flaking, but I think it's that initial step of fixing the loneliness inside yourself that will allow you to begin to fix the loneliness in your environment. And you have this beautiful project called the Terra Libre project, and it's
Hmm.
based on the foundation not of, I think it's building a better environment. And it's not so much giving an income to people, but why can you just share maybe the foundation of that idea with people? I think it's a beautiful idea.
Thanks. So the 10,000 foot perspective down is, uh, you know, what happens if you can use technology merged with sustainability and uh, modern practices for regenerative power creation, for communications, for all these things. And what happens if you can create a community where the foundations for life, the where to live, food, water, communication, internet, um, having a portal where you can sell your goods and services that is automatically generated, and a drag and drop interface so you can be unique. um, Removing the roadblocks and barriers of entry from just, hey, I have an idea, to, hey, this idea people like and they want more of. If you could put all of this and take all of the things that really stop people from achieving those things in society, and take all of those pieces out and just leave the core of it, what would you have? And that's kind of where it started from. And from there, it was an evolutional process. It's been a lot of R&D and making actual physical systems for, like, an automated garden, for instance, or something that power distribution and communication over a 3 mile area based upon just uh, differentiation of temperature between night and day. Some very interesting projects that have some very interesting applications. But then it was, well, how do you make this an actual thing that would work in the real world? And so that's been an evolution of process of, well, you have to have certain pieces to interface with, society. How are you going to trade goods? How are you going to resolve conflict? How are you going to, um, you know, get new people in? How are you going to manage all of these little nuances of things that you really don't think about when you're like, oh, that's a cool
Right.
idea. But when you get to the brass tacks of things, the brass tacks of things is a pain in the ass. I mean, that's why there's so much red tape in society. Because when you get down to brass tacks, that's all it is brass tacks. And then, there's many different reasons on in ways that works itself out now. But how do you create a system that doesn't fall into that same pit? And so, I've been working on this for about 15 years, just kind of a passion project on the side of things. And it got to the point where, now I'm to the stage where I have a, a working business model, because at the end of the day, it did have to become a business in order to fit in with the world. And so, that's kind of, and I think projects like this will be kind of, we talked about how we're kind of seeing the erosion of nation states, and we're going to
Mhm.
have like Apple cities and things like
Yeah.
that. But I think we'll also see the growth of projects like this, because at the end of the day, you're going to have, and we're already seeing it. I already hear about people who are forming communities in Kentucky's and places like this where, they bought up thousands of acres of land,
Yeah.
and they're just kind of very selectively selling off private parcels to certain individuals, right? So we're already seeing it happening in the United States, and I think we'll continue to see kind of a movement towards that, because the larger reality of the situation is you know people disagree, and it doesn't seem that there is a mechanism in place for that disagreement to be be handled currently. And in fact, it seems more and more disagreements continue to crop up now that we realize that we disagree. And so I think we're going to see a continued push for smaller projects like this to kind of, people who agree with each other, people who have same moral and ethical points of view on life, philosophical points of view on life, religious points of view on life, economic points of view on life.
Yeah. I can definitely see that path moving forward. You have the Free State Project, I think is it New
Hmm.
Hampshire or somewhere up in that area.
You got
But the,
Sealand, you got other things too.
yeah, what is Sealand like seasteading?
Well, they bought this old, I think it was a World War II kind of British outpost that was built in the ocean.
Mm.
And so they just purchased it, and they declared themselves a micronation, which, according to UN charter, I think the only things you have to have are uh, some sort of seal, like, the seal of the United States, a currency, and a passport of some sort.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems like it could be pretty easily done as long as you had the land. And I'm sure you could get invaded though, or be
Well,
sanctioned or
that's the
something
thing.
weird.
It's now you're living by the grace of wherever you decided to give the middle finger to. In
Right.
this case, the sea lands out in the ocean, so they don't have too much to worry about. But when you're in, like, rural Nebraska or something like that, you're living by the grace of not just the state of Nebraska, but also the federal government. And they could come and shut you down anytime, really.
Right.
And
Yep.
so, yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy that kind of develops. Not to
Yeah.
mention, if they wanted to put like you're not allowed to travel in our country, so now you're stuck in your little 5 acres. That would.
Right. Yeah. Good luck getting food if the fish is bad that day, or
Right, yeah.
clean water, or yeah. I, and I think that there's been, if you look back to the founding of America, I think that there were a lot of places that were tried. So I hate to say the word utopia, but like there were several projects that were put up where different societies were tried, and we ended up with one that was that worked well for a long time.
Well,
But you are seeing the cracks. Go ahead.
right. And why most of those failed is division of labor.
Yeah.
Is because at the end of the day, especially in those times when you didn't have mechanized machines, when you didn't have automation, when you didn't have computers, when you didn't have these things that allowed you to kind of move around the physical labor of a human being, uh, somebody had to shovel the shit, and
Yep.
and the person who shovels the shit is obviously going to be looked at differently than the person who's standing in the town square decreeing everything that's happening in the town, or the mayor, or so now the division of labor creates these, uh, almost imaginary but definitely visceral, divides in society, classes in society. And
Yeah. And
so I think, that's why we have the opportunity now to kind of overcome a lot of those hurdles. uh, you can now, instead of having, somebody to shovel the shit, well, you can make a system, like aquaponic systems, for instance. You can have a system produce hundreds of pounds of fish a year, produce tons of vegetables a year. It doesn't produce any waste. And, you can have automatic systems clean up animal waste. You can have all sorts of different things. We can institute the better parts of technology, the things that we've refined into, really bad ideas because of capitalism, like, big factory farming and things like that. We can take those types of engineering principles and those types of things, make them on a smaller scale, create, add sustainable technology and practices to them, and all of a sudden create sustainable communities. And so you remove that division of labor from the aspect of the community itself, and then the community isn't just a community, but it's also a business, where it's not just, hey, we're all working for a commune. Essentially, we're all working for individual wealth. And if you structure it the right way with like a blockchain backbone, so you have your own tokenized currency, you can have it so that everybody who's producing their goods and services in the community and selling them in the world at large, is generating individual wealth. But because of the increased transactional load on the network, the community is growing and prospering as well. And so now you have something that, instead of, all of these different hurdles and all of these different roadblocks to individual wealth, your focus is to create as many individual wealth points in the business as you can, because that is going to grow the greater whole of the business itself. And so you're investing in people, essentially, at the end of the day.
Yeah. It sounds well. First off, let me touch on the division of labor. Like, I've never really thought too much in depth about that, but I would have to agree that that is one of the dividing lines where society begins to deviate from brotherhood or sisterhood, or as as a as a as a community, because that's where you start drawing the lines of, okay, you shovel the shit, I count the money, and
Hmm.
you know
Every kid makes fun of the janitor, right?
every one of them. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. And it seems to me, if I'm just taking a cursory glance back at history, that was what the slaves were used for. You had a
Hmm.
class of, maybe merchants, and then other classes, but then you brought in the slaves to do that stuff. And, slavery's been around since the dawn of time, it seems like to me.
Hmm.
And only recently did we decide that everybody's a slave. It seems like we just went, okay, we're going to tell everyone slavery's ended, but now you're all slaves, except for this handful of people up here. But
Pretty
so
much. Yeah.
isn't it kind of seen like, it seems like the drudgery of work, we have, and to touch upon what you said about mechanization and allowing the computer systems to do the work for us, it seems to me that work has become the instead of people having time to create things or be artistic, everybody's time is taken up with work. Like, especially now with
Hmm.
inflation, it's like
Oh
you have
yeah.
to work 17 hours a day just to maintain the status quo, and I don't see that going away. I see that getting worse. So what can you just touch a little bit more on division of labor in the history, and how we can get it to change now?
Well, I mean, to your point, division of labor has always been there, and it was massively driven by slavery. We don't call it slavery these days. And then, closer to our historical past, we called it indentured
Mm,
servitude.
yeah.
There's been clever names throughout antiquity for it, but the reality is, by and large, most people walking around do not have the freedom just to say, "Hey, tomorrow I'm going to go do whatever I want."
Right.
Uh, and when you don't have that freedom, you know, it creates that problem where, now, instead of maybe having the creative idea or going on the adventure that would spark the creative idea, now I'm stuck working, 15 hours a day, coming home, spending 2 hours cleaning up because I haven't cleaned up in 3 days,
Yeah.
and then I have to go to bed because I'm already only going to get 6 hours of sleep after I sat down and ate a bite to eat, right?
Yep.
When somebody's time is taken up like that, there's no opportunity for an ulterior thought of, hey, maybe wouldn't it be cool to paint something neat, or wouldn't it be nice to go off and see this thing, or even have the idea of, hey, I could actually do X, Y, and Z better if we did it this way because I have experience in this field. So it removes innovation just from the idea talent pool, if you will.
Yep.
And where we're at today is, I I mean, you can see it. When's the last time you saw a movie that was like, hey, that's pretty original,
I can't tell you.
right? Right? Yeah, me either. I mean, everything's a remake,
Yep.
a sequel, a rehash, a reboot.
Yep.
There has been a couple originals along the way, but then you realize that, oh, it was actually a novel that was written in
Yeah.
1946, and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. And so we're already seeing it kind of play out at scale, which is once you just turn people into worker bees, you remove the ability for them to innovate, for them to create, for them to, come up with a great idea. More so when we pack on all of the roadblocks in society, all of the, well, if you don't have $1 million, nobody's going to look at your movie script to begin with, or if you haven't made 10 movies, or if you don't have 50,000 followers on TikTok, all of these little nuances of things in our society kind of play themselves out to the point where it's like, me actually having an idea as a human being and being able to bring it to the world, there's so many barriers of entry, let alone if you actually even have the knowledge of how to get there. Most people are never even taught how to steps to take to get there. Register an LLC? What's that? Right? You ask, I would gamble if you were to ask the average high school kid graduating this year, how do you register an LLC? I think you would get less than 30% of them, and that's probably on the high side.
Yeah, I agree.
And so how do we change these things now? Is you have to change the rules of the game. You have to change how the game is being played. If average individual A, Alice, only has 1 hour to herself every other day, well, she's never going to be able to go down and chase her dreams. She's never going to take that idea and run with it. She'll never be able to quit everything and sell everything and hop off to a different location. There's just too much friction there. But if all of a sudden, you know, she didn't have to worry about the house payment. She didn't have to worry about the water, the utility bills, the internet. Those are taken care of. So now all of a sudden the 13 hours I don't have to work, just to cover my ends meet. I can work 8 hours and I still have my money to go do my things and live my social life, but I actually have 6 hours left where I can go explore me, go grow, go adventure, go on a vacation, go see new things, have a novel experience. And I think if you were to interview a lot of people who came up with great ideas, a lot of those people have had the time to do that.
Right. So do you think, what do you think about like call like, obviously the student loan debacle is that just a
Hmm.
debacle. But what if there was some sort of program, and maybe this could fit into the framework of the Terra Libre, is like, what if there was some sort of grant for good ideas? Like, okay, here's X amount. Let me see your idea. Okay, and then the community gets together, looks at it. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Okay, well, here's a grant, or here is a place to stay while you work on your idea, or how does something like that pan out?
Yeah, so that's one of the benefits of having this whole thing arranged as a business and a network,
Right.
is because now you can allocate X amounts of funds that are set just for that. And we've talked about DAOs before, and we've talked about one person, one vote. So now all of a sudden, somebody with a good idea, everybody can propose ideas to this channel, let's say. They can propose an idea to this channel, and as long as there's an X amount of response from the community saying, yes, let's fund this, they get funding for that project. And that can be handled without the ability, you don't need any moderators, you don't need people reviewing projects, you don't need any of these things. The people in the community and the business who want to participate in this will participate in it. They're not actually putting up their own funds. They're just voting to allocate funds of the network and business itself to fund these projects. And this is all done with smart contracts.
Right.
And so, you don't have arbiters in this situation. So you enable a much more meritocratic environment.
This sounds a lot like, as we're talking about this, I bet you this is happening. Like, this seems like the World Economic Forum is already doing. They just take money from everybody, which is not their money, and they fund other people's projects in other parts of the world. And if it works, and they take all the profits from that and fund their own pet project for their kid over here.
The thing
You
is,
know what I mean?
you would structure it in such a way so that the people who are running the projects,
Yes.
they are generating the individual
Right.
wealth.
Right.
There isn't contracts here that are like, oh, by the way, because we funded it, we get 90% of the
Yeah.
proceeds in perpetuity or some crazy stuff like they
Right.
have going on in
Right.
the world today. So it really comes down to the nuance of the structure, and the beauty about where we are technologically, we can create a smart contract that dictates exactly that. And so there's no interpretation, right?
Right.
And when you remove that interpretation aspect, then you get a lot much more of a fair system that ends up playing out.
Yeah. And just for like, I've read a little bit about smart contracts and different
Hmm.
cryptocurrencies that are tied to them, and how sometimes, crypto can be both a means of transaction and a smart contract. But can you give me an idea of, like, let's say that I wanted to start a media company for the Terra Libre project. How would a smart contract look in that world?
So when you have a smart contract, so let's start with the blockchain.
Okay.
So the blockchain is going to be a series of transactions grouped into a block, is what they
Okay.
call it. And a block is just uh, usually a set number of transactions, and then it just every time that the next discovery in the algorithm happens, which is mining, then a block is generated. The transactions are inserted into the block. The maximum amount of transactions, that block then goes onto the blockchain, and it's basically a running ledger. A smart contract allows you to basically execute code when that happens. And so, let's say, like, I have the rights to my book,
Right.
and I want to sell you the rights, but I want 15% royalties. So we would have a smart contract that I would get 15% royalties every time the book sold, and those sales can be tracked by a different many different mechanisms, right? But
Right.
they could be tracked by a smart contract themselves. But then the idea would be that instead of having the lawyers and contracts and arbitrations and uh, escrow and all of these things, now I can take all of those and just wrap them up into some code that will fairly look at both sides of things and say, yes, X happened, so Y can happen, or Y happened, so I get 15% on my royalties from my book. You can do a lot of things with smart contracts. You got things like NFTs and stuff like that, which is a non-fundable token, which basically just means that, like, it would be, for instance, the best way I think about it personally is like a deed to a house.
Mm.
Yeah, I own the deed. As soon as you pay off the loan for it, you get transferred the deed, and that would be automatically driven type idea.
That brings me. I want to jump right back into this, but I want to. I've never thought about, like, we talk about automation a lot, but when we start introducing smart contracts and NFTs, it makes me I heard a while back that one of the biggest sections of people that are in danger are like a white collar class of people that
Oh yeah.
do finance. And when you talked about this, it seems to me like a smart contract could be way better than a lawyer, because there's really no ambiguity in the smart contracts. Like, you said this, I get that. There's no,
Right.
well, I didn't, what's the definition of is? There's none of that in
Hmm.
there. And so,
Right. And so I've I wrote many years ago that one of the, everybody, when blockchain was coming around, they were like, oh, it's just, there's nothing backing it, right? And
mm,
you'll still hear that today. There's nothing
right.
behind it. It's not backed by anything. But the reality of the situation is that it takes the cost of trust between any two entities and democratizes it down to the cost of electricity.
Wow. She said that again. Let me say that again. I need to process that.
All right. So it takes the cost of trust between any two entities, you and me doing business, and democratizes it down to the cost of electricity.
And can you define what's the cost of trust? Like, can you
So the
unpack that?
cost of trust in the world is going to be all of your institutions. It's going to be the overhead of having the building. It's going to be the lawyers. It's going to be the notaries. It's going to be the
Mm,
banks. It's going to be all of that infrastructure, all of the physical infrastructure, all of the digital infrastructure that they have to support, all of that IT infrastructure that they have to support. All of that cost gets replaced with the cost of electricity to mine at any given
wow.
location in the world.
Wow. That's giant. That
Yeah.
is giant.
So what that means on a practical level is that eventually, as all of this technology gets more mature, which now it is the businesses who are able to adopt and incorporate this technology will be operating at such a much more efficient uh, pace than their competitors, that it will just kick off a cascade of adoption, because if obviously, if my margins dip by 30% because I don't have all of these fees that I normally would on a yearly level, well, how are you going to compete with me as a competitor? You're going to have to figure out how I did it and adopt similar technology. And so that's one of the things that I see as the real value behind blockchain, is just because it does take all of that nuanced financial infrastructure and puts it into very concise, black and white code, smart contracts, you know, and all run by the cost of electricity, by, networks that are the only thing that we've built that hasn't been hacked yet. Right.
Yeah.
So Bitcoin as a network has never been hacked. This is something that's been running in the wild, is worth untold amounts of money, and has yet to be hacked. Now, people like third party exchanges and stuff definitely get
Right.
hacked,
Right.
but the network itself has never been hacked. There's not a piece of software out there that's never been hacked. And it's just because of the distributed nature of the network itself. In order to hack Bitcoin, you would have to hack 51+% of every single person running Bitcoin all across the globe, all at the same time. It just becomes an impractical thing.
Yeah. Gosh, it's so liberating to see it from that point of view. And it, as crazy as things seem right now, for me, it kind of pulls back the curtain a little bit, because like the weight of the system is what's holding us back. And we have if blockchain, if the promise of blockchain can do these things, and it can strip away just the husk from the corn, like, gosh, man, that would help out so many people. We would actually have, instead of having this world of nepotistic ridiculousness, or all these people that are in bullshit jobs making tons of money siphoning off the system, we would have people in positions that merit those positions. Like, you would
Mm-hmm.
actually see people that fucking knew what they were doing in the spots they
Meritocracy.
should be in. Meritocracy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah. And the thing is, getting getting people to that meritocratic stage, people would think, well, it's going to be hard to do. But the reality of the situation is, as soon as the rules are set into place and everybody knows it's hard coded and it's fair,
yeah.
nobody tries to cheat those systems in.
right?
Yeah, there's a few, but most of the people accept that as part of, it becomes an accepted wisdom pretty quick. So it's one of those things where, the transition from, oh, how do we get rid of all these like banking cartels and all of this stuff? Well, it's really easy. As soon as people at a consumer level start to adopt these things, those things will just naturally get pushed out to the extremity.
Yeah, and you could argue that's kind of what's happening now. That's why we
It is.
see these crises and even these wars is people hanging on to this. Oh, we got to have this old system still. You don't understand. It's not good. It's
Right.
horrible.
And it's not going to be without friction either. I mean,
Right. Of course. Of
so
course.
for instance, I mean, from like the adoption perspective, like, one of the promises of these things is that it's borderless technology, right? Like if I'm in Venezuela, I can send you, something in Israel. Uh, what actually ends up happening is because like the Ethereum, for instance, they have a central authority. They
Hmm.
have people who run it. Uh, Now all of a sudden those people become subject to state coercion, to financial coercion, to just political coercion, social coercion, and so for instance, if I wanted to send Ethereum today from Venezuela to you in Israel, I cannot do that. So the promise of the technology is there. The reality and practicality of it is you have a whole you have a massive monolithic system that has been in control for a very long time, and they're not just going to roll over and take
Right.
it.
Right.
So there is going to be friction along the path.
Yeah. And it seems that is where we're at with all technology. I was talking to this gentleman, Dan Hawk, yesterday,
Hmm.
and he's an indigenous Native American, and he is big on space. And we were talking about the way in which satellites can monitor, not only human beings or different, they can be used for military applications, but they can also monitor resources. And one thing he was having problem with was for he represents a large number of tribes in the United States, and they were wanting to put their own satellite up to monitor resources. And the
Hmm.
government was giving them a lot of pushback, like, "Oh, no, 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 you guys got to have all these, you got to have all this stuff." And he was
Hmm.
speculating one of the main reasons that they did not want them to have their own satellite is because they could see the resources, they could see the fraud that
Sure.
was happening, and the government's like, "Well, we
Absolutely.
don't have a license for that." And then it got me thinking, like, on one hand, I fear the idea of constant surveillance. And I think everybody should be skeptical of that on one hand. On the other hand, it's already happening now. And if we're going to have that kind of surveillance, maybe you can't stop technology, but you can play a part in it. Like, why don't we have like a people's satellite where we could monitor people like Monsanto, or you could monitor the military, like you could monitor an American corporation polluting a river in South America, and then you could hold them responsible. Hey, let's pull their charter, or let's penalize 30% of their profits and give that, you could reallocate that stuff if you could prove that they were acting nefarious. Like, why
So
is it that we are so
yeah,
scared of technology when we can use it to help us?
well, there's a couple things to unpack
Okay.
there. I
Okay.
think one of the things is, um, you know, all satellites, or well, a lot of the satellites that are up there are public satellites. Taxpayers paid for them.
Mm.
Uh, and a lot of that data is actually public record data. Uh, and you could find out a lot of things like that. The problem then becomes, well, if some big company who, yeah, they have a subsidiary who runs in the United States because they're a global company, yeah, they're found to be, deforesting the Amazon and polluting the Amazon River. But, what are you going to do? Sue the subsidiary in the States? Well, they actually have no assets, you come to find out.
Mm.
And so the basically who's holding the bill at the end of the day becomes a cat and mouse game
Mm.
in a lot of these instances, and I think that's why you don't see that implemented today, is just because there's so many ways to loophole through.
Yeah.
There's, there's private trust, there's offshore companies, there's,
Right.
there's, you could just go hire a guy to run a bank account for you, and that's one of the hardest things to detect from a fraud perspective.
Yeah.
So there's so many different nuances on how, you know, we figure out who holds culpability in the world. And so without having some sort of, judiciary body, for instance, that everyone is accountable, which, we've tried this, right? We had the, what was the predecessor to the UN, the
Yeah, that was the
Legion, oh, come on, League of Nations. There it is.
League of Nations. Nice
Yeah.
call.
So, we've been trying this for a while, uh, but nothing has any teeth, because the only thing that has teeth is, well, I have more bombs than you do.
Yeah.
And that's the only teeth that are respected in the world of today, pretty much. I mean, there's some economic teeth that can cause a puncture wound here and there, but at the end of the
Right.
day, it's really, who has the bigger gun,
Yeah.
and has been for a long time. Now we can lament on how unfortunate that is, but that is the reality.
Right. Yeah. I heard a good quote that was, "If you don't have a seat at the table, then you're on the menu."
Oh yeah.
And I mean, how many people really have a seat at the table? You can argue the
No,
table's
man.
just been getting smaller and smaller, and everyone's at the, if you're at the table, you're probably at the kids' table.
Well, we just witnessed the greatest redistribution of wealth in modern times,
Yeah.
and it's not even talked about. I mean, it's like the largest heist movie. It's like Ocean's 11 on a global scale, and we don't even talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's very interesting.
It is. And it just seems, it seems that the earliest I can remember paying attention was like the dot-com boom,
Mhm.
and it was just this, it was the first time I really noticed like the whole bubble economy and this larger idea of just scams. Like it's probably always been this way where
Oh
you just
yeah.
blow everything up and then you suck in all the profits. You blow everything up and then you suck in all the profits. And it's every time it becomes a bigger distribution of wealth until the people on the bottom have nothing. I was talking to
Hmm.
this guy I think he was in Switzerland, and I had asked him this question about technology. He he's a very fascinating guy. And I had asked him, I said, and I'll ask you the same question. Let me present you with the question and see what you think. So I saw an interesting conversation between Peter Thiel and one of the Weinstein brothers, and they were
Hmm.
saying in that conversation that we as a society have bet the farm on automation and technology, and it never shows up. It's always 5 years away. And if you took out every screen in your room would look almost the same as it did in 1950. And when I asked that guy this question, he said that in the world of technology, you have seen the world's biggest fraud take place. Not that technology is not moving forward, because it is, but it's this promise that of technology. Like
Hmm.
technology moves at a good clip, and it will, and it's progressing nicely. But you're not going to have the flying cars, and you're not going to have these giant self-sustaining cities coming up next year. But we're on the path to move forward. But the way he described it was, if the promises about technology were promised to any shareholders, these people promising would be in prison, because it's just this
Hmm.
ultimate fraud. And so I
Right.
know we've talked about the promise of technology before, but how is it that we have gotten, and what's the relationship between this promise, this fraudulent promise, and this blowing of bubbles and this transferring of wealth? How do all those things fit together?
Well, so there's a lot to unpack there for
Yeah.
sure. Um, I would start with, we have we've taken technology and the promise of it saying, oh yeah, a computer is going to be doing all the work you were doing, you're never
Yeah.
going to have to work again.
Yep.
The reality of that situation is our society has never been structured for that to become a reality, because you all of a sudden can't have a whole city's worth of people not working. And so, for a variety of reasons, and each individual personal company, the government involved, the regulators involved, all of them are going to have their different perspectives on why that is. But at the end of the day, our society was never structured for that to be a reality. So what does that mean for the promise of technology, or the promise of pharmacology, for that matter, or the promise of all of
Mm.
these things that we're supposed to be better living through our scientific endeavors? Well, it turns out that when we're all looking to make a buck, we're not, where that who actually makes that buck doesn't really trickle down as much as we were led to believe it does.
Right. Right.
And it usually stops at the very high level.
Yep.
And so now, yeah, I can automate just about anything, given a little bit of time and resources. But if I start building, if I start building automated factories, well, I'm going to have worker revolts. Or, like when McDonald's rolled out their fully automated McDonald's, they had a whole big, HR problem, because
Right.
now all of a sudden those people are like, oh, my job's disappearing. Why do I want to invest any more time with you guys? Even if it's just cash a paycheck, I'd rather go cash a paycheck that somebody who's not going to replace me with a robot.
Right.
So there's a lot of societal perception that comes into it as well. And so, I think, those multitude of factors end us up in a point where the money doesn't dictate that the average Joe or Jane should be have their time to themselves, have freedom, be able to just, embark on their lives. No, it actually works out better for all of the people, all of the powers in play, that, they're working 15, 16 hours a day, both of them, to maintain just a household of four, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that we see played out just about everywhere these days.
Yeah. When I think about that, it seems to me that whether we it seems to me that whether we have a radical shift in the structure of our society where less people work, or we continue to force people to work ever more hours to funnel up to the top, either way, what I see is there's no social mobility. And
Yeah.
in a world where there's no social mobility, the only social mobility is fictitious. And when that
Hence the
is a
metaverse.
fact, yeah, that's so true, man.
Hmm.
They've already thought about it. They've already thought
Oh
about
yeah,
it.
oh yeah. That's the whole idea behind you'll own nothing and like it.
So you'll have a fictitious social mobility where you can carry a sword and live in a pod and have an
I
ever
have a million
increasing.
coins. Yeah,
I'm a millionaire.
I killed 4 dragons this month. Hmm. Which, don't get me wrong, I love video games. I grew up on video games, and I appreciate all that stuff. But yeah, did you ever see the movie Ready Player One?
I tried to watch the movie. I read the book and I tried to watch the movie, but it was so like, here's all these white people living in trailers. Like it was so much of like, the book was awesome because I got to make my own movie in my head. But
Right.
I hated the stereotypes and stuff that they put in that movie. Like I
It
disliked
it
it.
was very stereotyped, but
The book was amazing.
the overarching premise of the
Agreed.
story, right,
Agreed.
is kind of I think somebody who was way high up at Facebook saw that movie and was like, we can do that.
Yeah, or that
uh,
was the business plan, and they're like, okay, let's put it out to the people in the book, then we'll put it out in the movie. And
right,
like all they have mosquitoes,
right.
jabbing people with the next vaccine. Like it's uncanny about all the things that were happening, and I would almost say that they have all that technology, and then they wrote that book, and then made the movie for the masses. But yeah, like all
Well,
those ideas are there, right? That is the future according people want to
Yeah,
build.
and I mean, it's nothing. It's not like there was any novel technology in that book. I mean, we've
Right.
had, omnidirectional treadmills. We've had full system haptic feedback. We've had a lot of these things for quite a number of years. You know, a kid in a trailer is not going to be able to ever afford one in our reality.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that technology is nothing novel for sure. And especially some of these digital worlds, some of these immersive massive digital worlds that have created these days, it's not really a far stretch to be able to just start plugging in people virtually to those things and giving them a little bit more freedom of access. I mean, just look at what Fortnite did for all of that, the kids of that age.
Yeah.
That was just a massive thing.
Yeah. Those sandbox games. I mean,
Hmm.
you can explore entire worlds. There's probably more square footage in virtual space than there is on the planet.
Oh, that's an interesting quandary. Huh.
I mean,
I would imagine so.
yeah. It.
Yeah.
I would.
Especially if you took in like instances, right? Because a lot of those
Yeah.
worlds are instanced out by however many players. If you took all of those instances, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. That. I mean, you know, it's like we're in some ways we're drowning in abstraction, which opens the door to so many possibilities. You know, I I
Mm-hmm.
I remember about 2 years ago, I was just enamored by people opening up shops in metaverse like worlds and selling skins or selling weapons or selling you can use your NFTs to become. I could use Popeye in the world of Zelda, and like you could just
Mm-hmm.
sell these things, and it's like on some level, I'm like, wow, this is going to change everything. But then I'm like, it really doesn't change anything, but it kind of changes everything, But it's
It's
fascinating.
instead of going to the mall, you're just going to the digital mall.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
So I mean, it's the same. It's the same game played out just on a digital space, or maybe a digital slash analog space.
Yeah, it reminds me. I was talking to this cat, Rangarajan, and he had told me about this meme that he saw, and the meme that he saw was like two dogs talking to each other, and one dog is like, man, I've always wanted to be a human. It seems like such an amazing time and such an amazing person, and like they do so much cool stuff. And so the dog dresses up and becomes a human for like a month, and then he comes back and he becomes a dog again, and the other dog's like, how was it? And he goes, I thought it was going to be amazing, but it's just a complicated game of fetch.
It's not too far off the mark.
Yeah.
Not too far off the mark.
Yeah, so I guess getting back to the idea of transfers of wealth and the metaverse and social mobility,
Hmm.
has there, looking back on it, has the opportunity for social mobility been constrained since the 1500s, or is it just something that's in high gear now, or how do you see that?
I think it's as far back as we have good history, it's always been constrained. Realistically, I mean, there's always been a glass ceiling for people.
Right.
If you were born on the wrong side of a mountain way back in the day, that was it, right?
Yeah.
Um, so, and it's the same thing today. Even when you have these massive successes or whatnot, like even like a Kanye West, right? Billionaire right now,
Right.
massively successful, creativity, can't argue it. He's done all sorts of cool business stuff, but that even that new money thing, that whole idea that you can do that, it's just a blink of the eye in the grander picture of the scale of wealth that exists on the planet. And that thing has so much momentum. and and the only people who are on the train of that massive wealth are the people who are born there, pretty much. You
Yeah.
don't really run and catch up to it. There's probably been a few throughout the years, but by and large, it's a very small select group of people, and it's all been lineage driven.
Yeah.
And even today, people are very interested in lineage. We have all these things, 23andMe and
Yep.
DNA and all this stuff, which kind of it took a little of the edge off of it, you could say, but at the same time, it invited an entire different, marketplace of ideas for this, the idea of lineage. Uh, and so, in terms of social mobility, I think it's pretty much always been pretty restricted. Carrying us to today, where even if you become like a Kanye West, yeah, you might have a few bucks, but your capacity to do something in the world is, yeah, he can make another song, he can put out more sneakers, but that's it. Kanye West isn't going to usher in a dramatic revolutionary change in society. You know, neither you or I, most
Right.
likely, right?
Right.
It's just the nature of the beast, of the reality of the situation that we're involved in. And I think when social mobility gets lower is also when you see unrest in the populace too, which
Right.
I think we're seeing a lot of currently.
Right. And so if we look at history and we look at today and we project into the future the continued degradation of nation states and the upstart city states and different kind of projects like that, what
Mhm.
do you think that does for social mobility? Does that a represent a new form of social mobility, or does that just make the divide and conquer and the squeezing of social mobility more prevalent?
It's going to dramatically depend on how that plays out from a growth level of those nation states and communities and things like that. If What I suspect is going to happen, if it kind of all fractures out, but everybody realizes that, hey, the investment in the time, the technology, the infrastructure that we put in to have a global communication systems, to have internet, to have supply chains, to have these things, these are good things beneficial to a lot of people. Let's figure out how to keep these things while we, go our separate ways type idea, which is like what I suspect will happen more often than not. I think there'll be a couple warm and hot places, but I don't think
Right.
it'll be as many as people suspect. Uh, I think if that happens, then you have almost a renaissance, because now you have to imagine you're going to have pockets of people who are just dedicated to causes,
Yeah.
and but not only dedicated to causes, they're enabled by the technology and resources that in supply chains and networks that have been fostered over the past 120 some years, and that will allow massive social mobility in certain places and probably almost no social mobility in other places. I can very much see a place where you have, like a New York type city center, where it is kind of like a Ready Player One,
Yeah.
where it's just people who are given a stipend every single month, who live in a box, and their only escape is to escape reality into these virtual worlds, and that's where they kind of live out their lives, their fantasies, their dreams, and whatnot. Um, Probably to a very detrimental living state and early death and whatnot. But I think we'll see a lot of those larger city centers kind of devolve into those types of welfare states, if you will.
Sort of like a new opium den.
Kind of, yeah.
Man, you know what? When you put it like that, I can see that. And then you mix in some of these lectures from like Noel Harari that talking about, you know, humans are hackable animals, and if we don't do
Hmm.
something, then the rats will take over. And you know, I just I don't really know that guy well enough to judge him on who he is as a person. However, I've read his books, and I'm not impressed with his books. I feel like I feel like he just rewrote Gun Germs and Steel for his first book, and then the anybody who sits back and calls out human beings as rats, and maybe I'm taking him out of context. I don't know that I listened to him, and this is just my opinion of what he said. However, anybody who just explains people like hackable animals to me is someone who has never been fond of humanity, who has never truly seen the beauty and what is possible of humankind if they're given the ability to express themselves. And it just makes me despise everything that guy works on. And maybe this is unfair, but when I think about him, I think about the World Economic Forum. And if
Yeah.
this guy's
Well,
advising the World Economic Forum, he doesn't see people as people. He sees them as numbers.
that's the reality of a lot of those people. When you're born into those circles, we're indoctrinated as
Sure.
just as those people are
Sure.
indoctrinated. When I had a fishing business for a few years out of my travels, where I'd bring people on luxurious, fully chartered 2 week uh, vacations in foreign countries, and I would be their host essentially. And
Nice.
I got to meet some very interesting and relatively powerful people from different places in the world. And there was definitely some common themes amongst them, and one of them was just a simple lack of perspective of what it is to live a day-to-day life for the common individual.
Yeah.
You have to imagine, if you've never been exposed to that, you're just kind of watching it from the outside looking in, like going to the zoo.
Yeah.
And then consequently, that's kind of the adoption of the pathology of a lot of those people, is they feel like they are the zookeeper, and they're just at the zoo, and the other people are just animals, or they're just rats or what have
Yeah.
and it's a very interesting uh, thing to be able to have one foot in and one foot out of a world like that. And getting to see that at the age I got to see it was really, fascinating to me. It completely broke down the remaining walls I had about the world, and I realized that, oh, okay, you can't even see that this is a problem, because you don't even perceive this as a problem, because it's not even registering sensorily to you or emotionally to you at any level. Like, it's just not there. And even though somebody's experienced tragedy in their life, even though they've experienced these things, it's just a different thing, because it's not the same type of burden placed upon everyday life, from any angle, whether that be a tragedy, or whether that be a resources, perspective, or whether that be, oh, what am I going to do with my life? No, 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 no. You're going to go here. Daddy already arranged this for you. You're going to be an intern here. You have by 27, you'll be a partner here. Don't worry about it,
Yep.
right? And that's the reality of a lot of those people's world. There has never been the question of, well, what am I going to do with my life? Or, and so that removes just such a huge perspective of, exploring life, right? If you're going to go be a junior partner at the law firm, there's not a whole lot of reason to go take basket weaving in college.
Yeah. You know, I, I often wonder too, like I've been fortunate enough to travel a little bit. However, I've never, and I lived in Mexico for about 6 months, and I lived in like this
Mhm.
really, I lived at a surf camp where everyone would leave, and it would just be me and I. Sometimes some people from the little Hito would come down, and I would talk to them, and that's where I learned Spanish, and I got to see how people lived pretty much without any technology, without a lot of technology, or definitely
Mhm.
not technology from the first world. And while it's a more simple life, I realized that those people knew so much more than I knew, especially when it came to survival and how to
Mhm.
live life. And they all seemed pretty fulfilled, and they all seemed like they were not a whole lot different than me in a lot of ways. And so when I look when I put my hat on as a philanthropist, not that I could ever understand what that's like, but in my mind, I see people going to maybe a third world country, say like in Africa somewhere, and like trying to help out this group of people. I
Mhm.
guess I could see how I'll just hypothetically, I could see how John Kerry could go to the third world and be like, we got to help these people. And the way we're going to help them is by stealing all the money from the people in my country and giving it to these people. Like I could see on some level how people like that think they're doing good. And maybe they are.
Mhm.
Maybe they are helping people. but at what cost? And who are they to decide, like, we're going to just steal all the money from those people in this country because they have enough. We need to help out these people. But the people on top, it seems to me, they never ever follow their own path. Like, they're like, we think these people on the bottom should have less, but we're not going to have less. When it comes to the topic of climate change that people are saying, like, they fly around in all their jets and they have all these grand visions of how they're helping people, but they never, not one of them, none of them ever follow the rules they set for other people. And it seems to me it's easy. If you guys want to have change, follow your own rules. You know,
rules
set the
rules for thee, not for me.
Yes. Yeah. Like,
brother.
how do they justify that in their minds?
Well, it's because they don't have the perspective. They've never given up everything. They never sold everything. They never packed their shit up into a bag or two and just went for it. They've never even had the opportunity to think about doing that. So it forms a completely different lens on the world, a completely different lens on reality. And yeah, these people have nothing. Oh, clear, they're in a house. We can take money from them. Yeah, they're
Right.
$50,000 in debt and they can't afford. They're about to lose the damn house
Yep.
because they can't keep a job for more than 20 hours a week.
Yep.
Because they're trying to keep healthcare, or whatever. There's all sorts of wild things, when you start to look at the lower economic brackets of how the West operates. It's a travesty. And you know what every single one of those people think when they see the next $60 billion going to Ukraine or going, money going here or going there? Well, gosh, $1,000 would change my life right now. There's probably, I would estimate, 50 to 100 million people in this country that $1,000 would change their month.
Yep.
Now, there's also probably 1 billion to 3 billion people that $1,000 would change their year. But the other side of that equation, or another side of those equations, is that, where are those people located? Is that what's that $1,000 going to go to? And then the reality of a lot of those situations is it gets funneled up to the corrupt top.
Yep.
Just like it does everywhere else. And so, we sent, X amount of money over there. Guess how much the people actually benefited from it? It's kind of the same sham as the nonprofits in this country. You're required to spend 5% of your intake of money on your purported cause for your nonprofit. That's probably about what ends up, maybe 5% to the bottom line of what people are trying to help. Oftentimes none, and oftentimes those people end up in worse states.
Yep.
Because now, instead of their sustainable ways that they've been utilizing for generations, they got sold some shammy, scammy, crappy product that's supposed to replace and change their world of life, and it breaks down after 2 years, and nobody has been cultivating the crop that allowed us to get through these times, or all these other little tiny things that downriver nobody really looks at because, hey, I did good.
Yeah. It blows my mind to think about it. It kind of reminds me of that. You ever see that movie a long time ago called The Gods Must Be Crazy?
Mm-hmm.
And they all of a sudden this Coke bottle falls from some plane somewhere on this tribe, and like one guy uses it as a hammer, one guy uses it to play music, one lady uses it to roll stuff, and everybody starts fighting over this technology, and it's almost like the story of Prometheus, how like this technology fell into their hands and like just did nothing but create chaos. And
and at the same time we're almost inexplicably compelled to explore and reinvent our environment.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's like we're the sowers of our own destruction, but we're like edging it out by 1% or 2 every generation, so we're okay so far.
Yeah. One thing I see, and I think it's becoming more obvious, is just the facade of this thing we call democracy. Like, and I'm hopeful that it leads maybe to an actual type of democracy where, the act of foreign aid is like you take money from poor people in rich countries and you give it to rich people in poor countries, and it never
Hmm.
pans out for any
Well,
people.
well, there's another part of that
Okay,
equation. You give it
please.
to rich people in poor countries because then they take the resources from the poor countries and give it to you. It's recycling, you see.
Yes, I do see. Yeah, I heard of something interesting that was talking about these billions of dollars that's going to Ukraine. Like how many of our politicians have like an NGO or some sort of special economic zone, and it just
All
gets
of them,
funneled right back into their family office, and
every single one of them.
every one of them.
Especially every single one of them. I mean, yeah, you could probably make an argument that some of the
Sure.
newer ones maybe not as much, but any single career politician, yeah, every single one of them. And if you
Yeah.
could show me one that didn't, I would be very surprised.
Yeah. It's living in Hawaii has been a real eye opener for me because you can really see what happens on a grand scale by seeing what happens right here. And because we're an island, everything is right in front of you. And we have the same national policies that are being, you can see I can see the policies in my state that are being rolled out throughout the entire nation. And one of them has been this idea of mass transit. And I can
Mm,
understand the reasons for mass transit. It alleviates traffic. It helps commercially. It brings people together, and it provides more time for things. However, they began to implement they call it the rail, and it was
mm.
fought over just tooth and nail, and it was pushed through by lobbyists and money, and we didn't get like some kick ass magnetic bullet train. We got like 1950s steel on steel,
Oh
and
shit!
then and like it's gone like 150 billion dollars over budget. It didn't even go where it's supposed to go. It's not even done yet,
Well,
and like it's so
and that's the
ridiculous.
yeah, that's the corruptness of the state, right? Because
Yeah.
and then when you ask the question of, well, why the hell did that happen, and you start to pull back the layers, oh, it turns out that this contract was given to this city congressman's husband or
Yep.
their cousin or their blah 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 that runs X company that does this. No, not the most qualified person, but just some form of diversified nepotism.
Diversified nepotism. That's so what it is. It's true.
It seems like it to me.
Without a doubt. That might be the form of government that we're under right now.
Well, could be. I mean, how many Bushes have we had? How many Clintons have we had? How many Kennedys have we had? How many, Cheneys? How many,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. And so if you take it to that level, you know, you could almost I could see when you look at it through that lens and the corruption, you know, you could almost make the argument that the Chinese model of state capitalism is better. I mean, from a
Well,
purely
from an
from an
efficiency
yes,
perspective,
from a pure
absolutely.
efficiency.
Yeah, I mean, well, and that's always going to be the reality of authoritarian control.
Right.
Because it's a lot easier for one person to make up their mind and say we're doing this than it is for a committee to say we're doing this. And they,
Right.
even if that's the difference of 2 minutes, 2 minutes times 10,000 decisions adds up pretty damn fast. Uh, and it's usually much longer whenever you have bureaucracy involved, right?
Yeah.
And so it's also why corporatism has taken over the world
Yep.
because you got one guy at the top. Yeah, he's beholden to a board sometimes and in a little bit depending on contracts and whatnot. But at the end of the day, he can make decisions or she can make decisions, and people say, "How high should I jump?" and it'll be done tomorrow. And when you can enable that type of ability to execute, you can just move more efficiently. You can move faster. You're going to use less resources potentially to accomplish similar goals. And so, just as you put the equation and run it over time, you're going to win. Is what it comes down to. And so the Chinese are aware of this. I mean, they're very smart in their long term game. They always have been. Uh, Minus when they killed all of the smart people in their country. I don't think that was the best idea, but I could be wrong.
Yeah.
They seem to
That
be doing all right. So who am I the judge?
yeah. It brings up another point. Like I forgot what I was listening to yesterday. but they brought up this point of the way the world is working right now in a way I had never thought of before. And they had approached the situation we're in right now as a currency war. And I was listening to like the narrator said, if you look at the way the China is working right now, like they have their own version of the IMF where they're going to third world countries and they're building ports, they're building roads, they're building, and they have structured their model in somewhat in dollars. So they, whether it's treasury bonds, so they have all these treasury bonds, and so they have given, let's just say Ecuador, we're going to build a road all the way through for you guys. Now they know Ecuador is never going to be able to pay them back, so they're going to end up with that road. But especially they have structured it in a way where, okay, United States, why don't you go ahead and make the dollar, if the dollar becomes strong, then there's no way these third world companies will ever pay us back. So by the United States having a strong dollar, they're ruining their future because China's going to end up with all these ports. So they put the United States in this catch-22 where it's like, okay, go ahead and make your dollar stronger against ours. Then we're going to own everything that these countries will never pay us back in because they can't afford to. Okay, go ahead and weaken your currency because now we're going to take you out on this other side. So it seems that,
and that
yeah,
that other side is the petrodollar. So
yes,
one of the things by and large that's kept the United States hegemony in the position that it's been in has been the petrodollar, basically the vice grip on the balls of oil.
right,
Um, China is aiming to depeg the US dollar as the petrodollar and institute the yuan at least as a competing currency against the petrodollar, which the petrodollar, in case anybody doesn't know, is just, when you buy oil in the world, it's settled in dollars. You can't buy oil in the world and not settle in dollars. Now you can now these days with Russia and everything that's happening and BRICS and all this other stuff, but that was the status quo for quite some time. And so, in a sense, it is a currency war, but it's not just a currency war. It's a cultural war. At the end of the day, it's not just the currency; it's the ideology behind the currency. It's the practices behind the currency. It's the processes. It's the broken, corrupted democracy, and it's all of these things. It's taking the marketplace of ideas of what we call society and saying they're saying we have a better one, and they've been moving forward with their plan to win that game, and nobody's really been playing against them. In fact, people were playing with them for quite some time up
yeah,
until very recently. I mean, it wasn't but 5 years ago where there wasn't a single product line that didn't touch some supply chain in China. Now those are starting to diversify out because people realize that it's bad to have all of that in one place. Go figure. It's not like everybody wasn't told never keep all your eggs in one basket as a kid, but here we are. And so moving forward, uh, you know, you have this now everybody's catching up and now they're realizing that, oh, these people are not going to stop instituting these practices. They're not going to stop these things. This is their policy. This is their plan. uh, you know, you watch what happened in Hong Kong. Hong Kong wasn't supposed to move back to China for another 20 some years. And then all of a sudden it was like overnight. And because they realized that they had the advantage in the situation. They knew nobody was going to come drop bombs on Hong Kong because they weren't dropping bombs on Hong Kong, right? They just
yeah,
happened to take it over from a political perspective and an economic perspective. And then, all of those people were friendly with the government. And so it just became a de facto part of China again. To your point about the Ecuadorian road, I was in Costa Rica. China donated a stadium, a whole police force worth of cars, police helicopter, built a couple bridges, uh, and then about 2.5 years, 3 years after that was done, Costa Rica signs a free trade agreement with China. Uh, gives away the rights to their fishing waters. All sorts of crazy stuff has happened since then. Most of the stores that you go to will be Chinese run now, whether that be hardware, grocery, things like this, things that all used to be locals. And I saw that up and down the Pacific coast,
Yeah.
from Chile on up. Uh, and so they've been doing this for 20 plus years. And so now you're hearing all these people talking about, oh, China's fishing fleet, they're murdering the seas and blah 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 blah. These are all sanctioned activities signed off on by corrupt governments who took out bribes from China. There's there's no legal recourse.
Yeah. Yeah, it's legal. I mean,
Yeah.
isn't it like I've seen some pretty interesting maps with the Belt and Road Initiative and how it comes all the way up from South America. But isn't that
Hmm.
sort of a violation of the Monroe Doctrine? Like I thought the United States was pretty heavy-handed when it came to our sphere of influence in South America. But I guess we're connected.
We
I guess we're taking money from them as well. So
Yeah, and to be frank, we shit that bed.
it's
We
true.
did. Look at all the crap that we've put on South America and Central America
Yeah.
over the past
Yeah.
50 years.
Yep.
It's just been a coup here, a coup there. It's
Yep.
been destabilization here, destabilization there. It's been nothing but, and nobody has risen economically. I
Right.
mean, yeah, some people, it's gone up a little bit, but by and large, most people are very, very poor in those countries still. And it's not like there's a lot of infrastructure and business, investment and all this stuff happening now. It's mostly just waiting for the next coup
Yeah.
in some of these places. I mean, you know, uh, and then you have places that, once they got cooed out, you had instituted dictators that have been in place for 20 some plus years. And so, of
Yeah.
course, nothing's going to change.
Yep.
You know, uh, so yeah, I don't think there's a lot of love lost between Central and South America and the United States. So it becomes a lot more difficult to say, hey, let us put 10,000 troops in this military base down here in your country. Well, we don't want your troops. We don't want your military base.
Yep.
Fuck off. I mean,
Yep.
that's kind of the response you're going to get. And so I think that's why you're seeing it. And the Chinese, to their credit, they went about it in a smart way. They
Yep.
said, hey, would you like all of this money?
Yep. Yeah.
It's free. It's
Yeah.
free. We swear. It's free. Here, take it.
Yeah. We don't
Yeah.
care how you govern. Just take the money. We're just going to build a road for you. You
Right.
know?
Well, and the thing is like, oh, one guy takes the free money and then tells China, oh, we're not going to do that. Well, guess what? That guy is no longer in power, or for a variety of reasons. Maybe he just
Right.
disappeared in the jungle.
Right.
But the next guy, he's willing to sign off.
Yeah.
And we see this everywhere. And
Yep.
to the people who are looking for it, and and aware of these things. And so the question then becomes, well, what do you do about it? I mean, it seems rampant, right? And I think what's happening is that society, culturally itself, is kind of dealing with it. That's why we saw like cancel culture, for instance, because you
Yeah.
have to figure 10 years ago nobody gave a crap. You could do whatever you want, right? But now everybody's talking to each other. Everybody realizes that people are people, and that maybe we should actually be a bit more responsible about some things. And then so the backlash, the rubber band effect comes, and cancel culture is born. And I think we're kind of seeing the end of that rubber band effect, and it's starting to come back the other way. You know, but I think we're going to continue to see these types of just fluctuations in society that are going to push it out to its breaking points, and then kind of bring it back, and then eventually things will break off and fracture. And I I don't see it being anything but inevitable at this point, just because of the policies that we're making and the people that are in power. And it's not like that changes rapidly. And even if it did, the changes that need to happen downstream from that, they don't happen rapidly either. And so, now how do you garner such a public will, such a social will to go after those endeavors? Or would you rather just kind of say, it is what it is. I'll just look at my TikTok videos. A lot of people are choosing B.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. There's so, sometimes in the face of adversity, people just don't want they've been like beaten dogs, they just don't want to participate And I can see the point. Like on some level, if you're a kid growing up right now and you live in a place where the average home price is $500,000,
Yeah.
you're like, what do I, dude? I'll just be the wizard. I'll just be the damn wizard killing dragons, and how am I supposed to compete in this world? And it kind of makes me sad in some ways to see that. And maybe this is just inevitable. Maybe this is how cultures work. Maybe it gets to a point where there's no social mobility and then things break down. And that's kind of where
Well,
we are now.
I wouldn't say that's the way cultures work. I would say
Okay.
that's the way like systems work. A
Ah,
system's only going to play out to its eventual end characteristics. I mean, and like for instance, our starting system, the conditions that gave our system life, is the Constitution,
right.
right? Um, you know, that's this is that system playing itself out. It lasted 250 years. Did a pretty damn good job.
Yeah.
Took over the world. I mean, so from in terms of like a system, not so bad,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that system's characteristics, its underlying foundations, in combination, determine where it stops, where it halts, where it breaks, where there's going to be faults. And eh, we could get in deep on the actual wordage of things and whatnot, but the words are important, and
Yeah.
we've talked a lot about that. And those words being so important, and then having so many different arbitrary points of authority that are interpreting these words supposedly in our best interest, is a system that just doesn't work when we can talk 1,600 miles apart instantaneously. It starts to break down because now I know it's not my best interest. And if it's not your best interest, and if it's not their best interest, whose best interest is it? Well, George, it's Nancy Pelosi's best interest. Hate to break it to you.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. So do you think that, like, we've talked, you have said something that I keep thinking about, and that's that it's not that we go around in a circle, it's that we go around like in a helical,
mhm,
is that the right way?
helical. Yeah.
So can it seems to me that the next rung on the helical ladder seems to be this idea of state capitalism. That's what the United States is trying to adopt. Is that sound accurate to you? Do you think that that is potentially the next rung on the helical ladder of
Well, I
systems?
mean, that's the. I, I wouldn't say the United States is just trying to adopt it. I would say that that's the adoption of the International Monetary Fund, right?
Mm,
That's the
okay.
IMF.
Okay, that makes sense.
Their whole, and if you look at it, the United States hasn't really been embroiled in any conflict in any place that did not have a central bank before we went into conflict with them, and then ended up with one after we did.
Right.
Uh, and their declared goal is that by 2025 there will be central bank digital currencies uh, rolled out in every country.
Mm,
And so Biden already signed an executive order charging the Treasury Department to do that. Canada's already rolled out theirs. Australia's rolling out theirs. China has theirs rolled out last June. So this is where things are going for sure. That's the intention of that group of people.
yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of evidence to say that that is a big part of where all this Ukrainian money is going. Is it's going to recapitalize the European banks, or even to be the foundation for the new digital currency. I mean, you're talking about $700 billion at the stroke of a pen. Like, and
Yeah.
maybe 10% goes to the there's soldiers and people in Ukraine. Like, yeah, we're not getting any of this money.
Oh, they're
You
not.
know,
No, they're definitely not getting any of the money. I mean, and then, let. And the other side about this is that from a military industrial complex perspective, they're loving the hell out of this.
yeah,
They get to field test their weapons without having to actually risk lives of people that they're semi responsible to at some level, some societal level.
yeah.
And so now you just got a, a menagerie of fuckery going on. And it's really interesting watching it unfold. It's turning into quite the quagmire,
Yeah.
and I don't think it stops being a quagmire for some time.
No, I think that's baked into the cake. I think the bigger the
Hmm.
quagmire, the bigger the opportunities for them. You know, the
Hmm.
more muddy the waters, the better. What do you like?
Yep.
Let's say, how do you think the pension funds and these big sort of trusts end up by 2025? If there's a digital currency, do the pension funds just they trade their paper
Yeah.
IOUs for this digital currency?
Right. So that's how they'll make it. They'll grease the wheels on every step of the way to get people to adopt this. So for like the big pension funds, they might even give them a rate, right?
Mm,
So you might get you know 90 cents to the dollar type thing for each conversion. So you're making 10 cents on every dollar, every $100 you convert or something like that. And then for individual people, it'll be a type of a welfare thing. Well, if you sign up to the central bank digital currency and download the app, you're
mm.
going to get $500 as a sign up bonus. And then in stretching that out, that'll also be how they facilitate the adoption of things like more of a welfare state in cities, like we were talking about before, because now I can just add a couple digital zeros. My infrastructure cost to do so is minimal, and I can just send it out, ad nauseum to everybody on this list. And so, hey, if you're in New York City and you have the central bank digital currency app and you've changed in cash this month, you're going to get a $200 stipend. And
Mm.
so now you're going to, get people invested in the idea that I can get on the digital currency system. And if I bring other people, I can get money from it. Or if I turn in cash, I can get more money from it. And so you create an incentive structure behind it. And so I think we'll see those incentive structures roll out in every country, really, just depending on need and greed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to pay attention to all the different countries and how fast they're rolling things out. I just saw like I think in Australia they've rolled out some crazy idea that they're going to be net zero in the next like 10 years. You know, like
Yeah,
they're just
which is
boom bringing the
wild stuff.
knife down.
That whole climate thing is just uh, I mean, people are getting banned left and right talking about it,
Yeah.
which is wild too. It's like you can't even talk about the scientific counterpoints without potentially subjecting yourself to losing your all of your efforts.
Now, do you see that as a form of weakness or a form of power? Because it seems to me when people become that militant, it's like they're
It's always a form of weakness.
yeah, I
It's
agree.
always a form of weakness.
Yeah.
If you're not willing to listen to other people's ideas, especially ideas that run counter to yours, then your your faith in your ideas for one, but your ability to reconcile them into the world, to argue that that's the better idea, all of these things, well, you're not giving the idea it's room to breathe. Every idea should be contested.
Yeah.
If we're all just going to follow somebody who says I have an idea, well, we probably wouldn't be here. I'm pretty
Right.
sure I played that Lemmings game back in the day. I'm pretty sure that that's how that ended up.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems that the best idea will win, and if you don't allow those ideas to be fought over or like you said
then
contested,
then the loudest idea wins.
right, and the emptiest barrel makes the loudest sound, right? We end up just
Indeed.
just
Yep.
being empty inside.
Hmm.
Benjamin C. George, I love talking to you, man. This is fun. And
Likewise, brother.
it's always fascinating to me to see where we end up because we have really had some interesting conversations, some of them more structured than others. And I really feel like it's a journey in itself. Like I never know where we're gonna go. We might turn the wheel this way, we might turn it over that way, but I feel like I always learn something, and I've gotten some good feedback, and for those people paying attention, probably me and you the most. Like our conversations have gone from like we've doubled and tripled the amount of people that are watching, and we're getting questions coming in, and I'm really thankful to get to be in the passenger seat and ride with you for a while, man. I'm really thankful for that. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise, brother. It's been a good time. I've appreciated you bringing me onto the podcast scene. I've been wanting to do it for years, and then finally had the proper motivation. So
When do you have a launch date for when you got the No Absolutes podcast starting up?
I don't have a launch date yet. I've just been kind of putting things together.
You got a
Uh,
lot of stuff on your plate.
I do. It'll be one of those things where it'll probably be a weekend where I'm like, damn it, finally I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And then, so,
All right. All
but
right.
it should, I expect, my goal rather is by the end of September.
Nice. Well, I know you got a lot on your plate, but I hope that you are able to at least carve out a few hours for me on Wednesdays, because I don't want to
Heck
give it
yeah.
up, brother.
No, no,
Okay.
no. This is fantastic. And I think, the nature of our conversations, uh, we've touched on it offline a bit, but, I, these are great conversations because you don't get to have them every day. It's a hard conversation to have in a community.
It is.
Even it's a hard conversation just to bring up with family members. So, you know, I hope that us having these types of conversations and continued conversations like this allows people to take part in these conversations and be like, aha, okay, I'm not the only person who thinks this way in the world, because that's always a nice, comforting thought. Nobody
Yeah.
likes to think they're crazy.
Yeah. And it's, as it's growing too, like I really think that there's something to be said. Like, both of us and a lot of people listening to this have a similar story where they have taken life as an adventure and they've packed their bags and they have said, you know what, I'm going to do this thing. And I think this is kind of a spot where people can find each other. Like, I've noticed that between you and a lot of other people I've been talking to, there's people all over the world, but we all have these things in common. And I feel like we're building this network somewhat. And that brings me to
Hmm.
another idea. How would you feel about having a panel of people come on and maybe us having like 3 or 4 people talking?
I would love it. I think
Okay.
the open discussion of ideas, there's really nothing like it.
Yeah. Cause I've gotten a few other people that are interested in doing it. So I'm thinking about maybe throwing something together like that where we could have a conversation and we could hear 4 interesting different perspectives that we would probably all be like, oh, I never thought about it. It would just enrich the conversation. So maybe in the future we can set something up like that.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Okay, awesome. Anything? Oh, Benjamin George, where can they find you? What do you got coming up? And what would you like to say before we go?
BenjaminCGeorge.com is the home for everything I do these days. And everybody just have a great week.
Okay, I love it. I love it. And then links will be down below. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for spending time with us. We're looking forward to the next one, and we always have fun doing it. Feel free to jump in the conversation anytime on the live broadcast and reach out to myself or either Benjamin at the links below, and we'll talk to you again next week. All right. Aloha.
Bye, everybody.